At my son's ICU bed, my mom said, "It's just one birthday." So I sued her into bankruptcy, and then I never really believed in fairness. Not in the cosmic sense, anyway. If you grew up in my house, you'd understand why. My childhood wasn't some sitcom story filled with hugs and life lessons. It was a long lesson in being invisible unless something went wrong. My enormous face. I'm 41 now, but this started years ago when I was a kid in northern Kentucky, just across the river from Cincinnati. My parents, Helen and Norman, were those types who believed in structure and rules, but only when they applied to me. My younger brother Isaac could light the living room rug on fire, and they'd praise his curiosity. I brought home straight A's and a B plus in geometry, and my mom asked me what went wrong. By the time I was 16, I was working after school at a lumber yard and spending weekends helping with roofing jobs. Not because they needed me to, it's just that no one else was going to buy me a car or help me with college applications. Meanwhile, Isaac would barely make it to class, crash mom's car twice, and still somehow be the prince of the house. Dad would say he just needs time to find himself. I figured out who I was by the time I turned 18. I was the guy who had to get out. I moved out the summer after graduation, took a full-time job with a contractor, and enrolled part-time at a local community college. I was already pulling 60-hour weeks before I hit 21. Eventually, I transferred to a 4-year program and earned my business degree by working through the nights and studying during lunch breaks. I didn't go to parties. I didn't date much. I didn't have time to be young. At 29, I'd saved enough to open my own renovation company. Small scale at first, home repairs and basement redos, but I was good, fair, and fast. Word spread. That's how I met Rachel. She was the office manager at a dental clinic I was hired to remodel. She asked me to patch a hole in the wall, and I made some dumb joke about dentists not being gentle with drywall. She laughed, really laughed, loud and open, and I remember thinking it was the best sound I'd heard in years. She didn't play games, didn't make me feel like I had to audition just to matter. We got married within 2 years. By the time I turned 32, our son Aaron was born. My business was growing. Our home had a backyard with a swing set, and most nights ended with a toddler in my lap and Rachel dozing beside me on the couch. I thought I'd finally made it past the weight of my parents' approval. I made something real, something good. But good things don't last forever, and sometimes they don't even last long enough to feel fair. 3 years after Aaron was born, Rachel died in a car crash on her way home from work. A guy in a delivery truck ran a red light, going nearly 70 in a 40 zone. The police told me she died instantly. There was no time to say goodbye, no last words. One moment, I was texting her to ask if we needed milk, and the next I was staring at the flashing lights on my front porch. The weeks after her death blurred into each other. I barely remember the funeral. I do remember holding Aaron every night while he cried, his little arms wrapped around my neck, asking when mommy was coming back. I remember thinking that grief isn't just sadness, it's static, noise in your head that never lets you think straight. My parents came to the service. Helen brought a tray of cold cuts like she was attending a church potluck, and Norman stood stiffly beside me, giving a single nod and saying she was a good woman. Then, as I tried to juggle mourners and casseroles and a son who wouldn't stop asking for answers I couldn't give, they left early. Isaac had just moved into another apartment and needed help unloading a futon. They couldn't stay, couldn't hold their grandson for 10 minutes, couldn't ask how I was holding up. The one person who didn't treat Rachel's death like an inconvenience was her mother, Gwen. Gwen flew in from Oregon the day after the crash and moved into our guest room without asking. She was 65, walked with a limp from her arthritis, and still made breakfast for Aaron every single morning. She did the laundry, helped with preschool pickup, even stayed up with me in the silence when I couldn't sleep. When she finally had to return home, her sister had MS and needed her. She cried harder than I did at the funeral. She made me promise I'd call her every single day, and I did. Still do. After Gwen left, I tried rebuilding our life piece by piece. I cut back my work hours, hired a part-time babysitter, learned to cook more than eggs and frozen pizza. I couldn't bring Rachel back, but I could make sure Aaron had some stability. He needed a bedtime routine, someone to show up to parent-teacher meetings, a lunchbox with jokes tucked inside. He needed a father who didn't disappear. The business didn't fall apart. I had loyal staff, and I focused only on projects I could manage. Life became manageable. Not happy exactly, but steady. Some nights I even laughed again. As for my parents, I kept the door cracked open, mostly for Aaron's sake. They lived just 15 minutes away and saw him maybe once every other month, always on their terms. If it didn't conflict with Isaac's latest job hunt or new girlfriend or investment scheme, they'd meet us for lunch and spend the entire meal asking Aaron if he wanted to be an astronaut or telling me that Isaac's idea for a dog walking app had real potential. I nodded, paid the bill, and left those meetings feeling like I was still 12 years old and invisible. But I still gave them the chance to be present, to be better grandparents than they were parents. I thought maybe Aaron would bring out something decent in them. I was wrong. It wasn't one moment that proved it. It was dozens. But the one that finally tore the roof off came in the spring, 5 years ago. The day I realized some people will always choose comfort, even if it means turning their back on someone who needs them. It happened on a Tuesday morning, sometime in late April. The sky had that overcast gray tone that always made the house feel quieter than it was, and I remember thinking it might rain later. Maybe I need to move a job site meeting indoors. I was packing Aaron's lunch and thinking about this massive contract I had to close that night. Aaron, who had just turned 6 a few months earlier, was sitting at the counter telling me all about how T-Rex legs weren't built for running fast because their weight made them unstable. We'd watched a documentary the night before, and he was obsessed with prehistoric facts lately. He spooned cereal into his mouth between dinosaur stats, rambling the way only a 6-year-old can. Then mid-sentence, he stopped, just froze. The spoon fell from his hand and clattered against the bowl. His eyes rolled back, so fast it made my heart stop. I didn't think. I jumped across the kitchen as he slid off the stool and hit the floor. His body went stiff, limbs jerking in unnatural spasms, and blood started trickling from his mouth. When I rolled him onto his side, I saw he'd bitten through his tongue. I'd taken a basic first aid course after Rachel died, trying to feel a little less helpless in a world I didn't trust anymore. That training kicked in like instinct. I cleared his airway, made sure he was positioned safely, and started counting seconds. After 2 minutes, nothing stopped. The seizure kept going. I scooped him up, grabbed the keys, and carried him to the car like he weighed nothing. I made that drive in 6 minutes flat. No regard for speed limits, red lights, or anything else. If a cop had tried to stop me, I might have kept driving anyway. I pulled right up to the ER doors, ran in with him limp in my arms, shouting for help like a man whose world was caving in. A gurney appeared instantly. They took him from my hands and whisked him away while I stood there covered in blood and panic, barely able to spell my own name. I answered questions in a fog, filling out registration forms while watching the doors he'd disappeared through like they might open at any second with someone telling me it was all just a mistake. 4 hours later, a doctor finally approached me in the waiting area. Her name was Dr. Miriam, and she had the kind of expression you never want to see on someone wearing a white coat, controlled urgency, tired eyes. No small talk. She said Aaron had bacterial meningitis, that the swelling in his brain from the infection had caused the seizure, and that the next 48 hours would be critical. They were moving him to the pediatric ICU. They'd started him on 2 kinds of antibiotics and were monitoring his intracranial pressure. If it didn't decrease fast enough, they'd have to perform a procedure to relieve the pressure manually. I followed the team as they wheeled him to a sterile, humming ICU room filled with machines and soft beeps and sterile smells that would haunt me later. I sat beside him while they connected the IVs, adjusted the monitors, and started the breathing machine. He was unconscious but alive. I held his tiny hand and tried to keep my own from shaking. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I still had to make a choice. That night's meeting wasn't just important. it was pivotal. My company had been in talks with a group of investors from Hong Kong for months, trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal to renovate a series of boutique gyms across the Midwest. The deal would change the entire trajectory of my business. It meant more jobs, more reach, more long-term stability, not just for me, but for Aaron's future. They were flying in just for that night. My partner Greg was in Berlin negotiating material contracts. I was the only one who could finalize the terms. I asked the head nurse for an update. She said Aaron was stable for now and that he'd be closely monitored overnight. I paced the hallway, debating my next move. I could cancel the meeting and risk losing the deal entirely, or I could find someone I trusted to sit with Aaron for a few hours. And even though they disappointed me in every imaginable way, I called my parents. They lived 15 minutes from the hospital. I explained everything clearly. Aaron was in ICU with a serious infection. I didn't need to do anything medical, just be present in case anything changed while I was gone for 4 hours. They said yes without hesitation. Mom's voice softened, and for a second, I believed her when she said, "Of course, Wes. Go take care of what you need to. We've got him." They arrived by 5:15. Dad did his usual nod, the only form of affection I'd ever seen him give. Mom patted Aaron's hand and made a show of fussing with the blanket. I walked them through everything, what to watch for, what to ask the nurses when I'd be back. I told them I'd leave my phone on and to call for anything at all. I trusted them against my better judgment because in that moment, I didn't have other options. I kissed Aaron's forehead, whispered that I loved him, and walked out of that room with a boulder in my chest. The meeting was at an upscale hotel downtown. I arrived looking like hell, still in jeans and the same jacket I'd worn to the hospital, minus the shirt I'd bled on. The investors didn't flinch. Mr. Chung, the lead, shook my hand and said he understood that family emergencies came first. We went through the documents, blueprints, and estimates, crossing every T, confirming every number. They were kind, respectful, and surprisingly warm. Around 8:30, we finished. We signed. The contract was mine. As we were wrapping up, I checked my phone. I'd silenced it before the meeting, something I now regret more than almost anything. 17 missed calls from the hospital. The last one had been just 30 minutes earlier. My stomach dropped. I ran from the conference room without saying goodbye, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear traffic on the way back to the hospital. When I got to the ICU, the energy around Aaron's room was completely different. Nurses were moving fast, whispering to each other, updating charts. Dr. Miriam was back, her face stony. "Where have you been?" she asked. "We've been trying to reach a guardian for over 3 hours. Your son's condition changed rapidly. His intracranial pressure spiked. We had to perform an emergency ventriculostomy." It took me a second to even process the word. She explained they had to drill into his skull to relieve the swelling, without parental consent, under emergency protocol. If they'd waited, he could have suffered irreversible brain damage, maybe even died. My legs buckled. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. I kept repeating the same thing. My parents were supposed to be here. They were supposed to be here. A nurse stepped forward. "Sir, no one's been with your son since 6:15. They'd waited, called everyone listed in the file. No one picked up. I tried calling Mom, then Dad. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. I left message after message, each one shorter, sharper, more panicked. Then I sat in the chair beside Aaron's bed and tried not to scream. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Aaron was stable again, but the damage was already done. Not to him, thank God, but to the last shreds of trust one had left. I opened Facebook, mostly to distract myself. The first post in my feed made my blood go cold. It was a picture of Isaac at a steakhouse, a huge 28 balloon behind him. He was surrounded by friends, smiling wide. The caption read, "Best birthday surprise ever. Thanks Mom and Dad for making it unforgettable." Time stamped at 7:42 p.m., while my son's skull was being drilled open, while they ignored every call, while I sat in an ICU chair, believing they were only steps away, holding his hand. I must have stared at that photo for 10 full minutes before I realized my hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The room around me didn't exist anymore, just that image frozen on the screen. Isaac's dumb, gleaming smile. A full table of wine glasses and steak platters. And my parents, sitting right beside him, raising their glasses like they were the heroes of the evening. No sign of guilt. No concern. No clue that their grandson had nearly died while they sipped cocktails across town. They hadn't just failed to answer their phones. They'd left him without a word and gone to a birthday dinner like it was any other Tuesday night. I took a screenshot of the post, captured the timestamp, and tucked the phone in my pocket. I couldn't look at it again, not without breaking something. I turned back to Aaron, who was lying still under soft hospital light, tubes running from both arms, a bandage covering the side of his head where they drilled. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just sat there, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, wondering how the hell I'd ever thought my parents could be trusted with anything that mattered. They showed up just after 6 the next morning, walking into the ICU like they hadn't vanished 12 hours earlier. I didn't speak right away. I didn't even look at them, not until I heard my dad say, with a casual tone that almost made me laugh, "So, how's he doing?" We grabbed some breakfast on the way back. I finally looked up. My voice came out colder than I expected. "You went out for breakfast for 12 hours?" Mom's face pinched up like she knew she'd stepped on a landmine, but didn't know why it exploded. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked. I didn't say a word. I just pulled out my phone, opened the screenshot, and turned the screen toward them. Isaac's smiling face. Their toasting glasses. That damning time stamp glaring at us like a clock from hell. For once, they were speechless. My dad cleared his throat first, then tried that dismissive tone he always used when I challenged him as a kid. It was just for a couple hours. Pete had been planning that dinner for weeks. My voice cracked, but not from tears, from restraint. They drilled into Aaron's skull last night because the pressure on his brain was killing him. He could have died while you were ordering dessert. Mom straightened her back, always quick to defend herself even when logic wasn't on her side. "You're overreacting. This is a hospital, Wes." He was in good hands. There were nurses and doctors everywhere. Pete only turns 28 once. I stood up then, something inside me snapping into a perfect and permanent silence. I stared at them and saw them clearly for the first time, not as the people I used to need, but as the strangers they'd become. "Get out," I said. Mom's mouth dropped open. "You don't mean that." I didn't blink. "Get out of this room. Now." Her voice rose with that familiar edge she used whenever she felt criticized. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You're so dramatic, just like when you were little. At least Isaac appreciates what we do for him." I didn't shout. I didn't flinch. I just said it again, louder. "Get out." A security guard had appeared at the door, alerted by the rising voices. My dad waved him off, muttering something under his breath, then put a hand on Mom's arm. "Let's go." He's always been like this, making mountains out of nothing. They turned to leave, but not before Mom gave me one last cold look and said, "Don't bother calling us again for help." I didn't even hesitate. "Don't worry. That mistake won't happen again." After they left, I sat down beside Aaron and something strange happened. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel grief. I felt free. The last thread tying me to them had finally snapped, and all that remained was clarity. They'd made a choice, and now I had too. Later that morning, Dr. Miriam returned for her rounds. She checked Aaron's vitals, examined the drain site, reviewed lab results, and adjusted his medication. She looked tired but hopeful. The antibiotics are working. His pressure's coming down. He's stable for now, but we're not out of danger yet. I nodded. I didn't ask the usual questions. She must have sensed something because she sat beside me after she finished her notes. "Mr. Wes, I need to tell you something. Not as a doctor, but as someone who's seen too much." I turned toward her, already bracing. What happened last night qualifies as medical neglect. Your parents abandoned a critically ill child in the ICU without informing any staff. We have no record of them telling a nurse or doctor they were leaving. That could have cost him his life. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. We documented everything: the time they left, the missed calls, the emergency procedure. If you ever decide to pursue this legally, you have every right to. I looked at her, surprised. You think I should sue my own parents? Her gaze didn't waver. I think you should do whatever ensures your son is protected. Too many children suffer because the adults around them refuse to take responsibility. That's all I'm saying. That afternoon, I called Gwen. She answered on the first ring. "How's my boy?" she asked immediately. I told her everything: what had happened in the kitchen, the seizure, the ICU, the emergency surgery. Then I told her what my parents had done. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, "Oh my God." She just said, "I'm on the next flight. Stay with Aaron. I'll be there before midnight." My business partner Greg called soon after. I'd texted him a brief update before the meeting. They signed, I told him. We got the contract. His tone was steady, but I could hear the strain. "None of that matters now. Just take care of your son. The business will wait." He paused. Chung called me. Said you were professional, composed, and honest. You want to work with us long term. But seriously, don't come back until Aaron's okay. We've got you covered. That evening, a nurse brought in a folder and handed me a business card. "This is Michael Grant. He's with the hospital's legal counsel. He'd like to speak with you when you have a moment." Michael showed up about an hour later. Mid-40s, direct, no unnecessary words. He laid out simply: the hospital is obligated to report any suspected child endangerment. What happened last night falls into that category. He told me the hospital would be filing its own report, but I also had the right to file a civil lawsuit. He explained the difference between negligence and intentional harm, walked me through possible damages, how long a case like that could take, and what I'd need to prove. Talk to your own attorney before deciding. But don't wait too long. There are statutes of limitation on this sort of thing. When Gwen arrived that night, I finally let go of the breath I'd been holding all day. She hugged me without a word, then went straight to Aaron's bedside. She ran her hand through his hair and kissed his forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then she turned to me and said, "Go home and sleep. I've got him tonight." I stayed anyway. We both did. That night, as the machines beeped steadily and Gwen sat knitting quietly beside the bed, I stared at the ceiling and realized something simple and painful. Blood means nothing if people show you, over and over, that they can't be trusted with the most fragile part of your life. Family isn't who shares your name. It's who stays when everything else falls apart. Aaron spent nearly 2 weeks in the hospital, and during every hour of those days, Gwen never once left his side unless I physically made her take a break. She stayed through every blood draw, every painful whisper from the doctors, every hour-long stretch of silence where the machines did the only talking. The day Aaron finally opened his eyes, groggy and disoriented, the first thing he saw was Gwen's tired face leaning over him, whispering, "Hi, baby. You gave us quite a scare." He blinked slowly, then whispered back, "I dreamed about spaceships," and she laughed with relief that made her knees buckle. While Aaron began his recovery, I started preparing for a different kind of battle. I met with a lawyer named Colton Hayes, a man in his early 50s with a calm, analytical way of speaking that made even horrifying facts sound procedural. I gave him everything: medical records, nurse statements, my call logs, the screenshots from social media, the documentation from the hospital's legal department, and a written account of what happened. He listened without interrupting, took notes without expression, and then finally said, "This is a strong case, but I want you to be emotionally prepared for what this will bring out. Suing your own parents is going to bring out sides of them you've never seen before, and it won't be pretty." I told him they stopped being parents the moment they walked out on their sick grandson to go eat overpriced steak. Colton filed the lawsuit 2 days later. Charges: gross negligence, child endangerment, and emotional distress. The moment the papers were served, all hell broke loose. Dad called me, his voice already raised before I could speak. What the hell is wrong with you? You're suing your own flesh and blood over a misunderstanding. I let him go on until he ran out of breath, then calmly asked him to name one single thing he'd done for me, or for Aaron, in the last 10 years that didn't involve Isaac's convenience. When the line went silent, I hung up. Mom tried guilt. She called crying, her voice tight with panic, saying I was tearing the family apart and that this would destroy Dad. When that didn't work, she shifted tactics, her tone turning sharp and bitter. You've always been an ungrateful little boy, twisting every slight into some dramatic performance. I hope you enjoy airing your dirty laundry in public. I told her this wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. She hung up on me mid-sentence. The lawsuit crawled forward like lawsuits do, slow, full of paperwork, delays, and depositions. My parents hired an expensive law firm that specialized in family disputes, and from day one, their strategy was obvious. Paint me as an irresponsible single father who had abandoned his own child for a business meeting and was now shifting the blame. But facts don't lie, and the facts were brutal. The hospital had records of when my parents arrived and when they left. The charge nurse confirmed that Aaron had been unattended when the emergency occurred. Dr. Miriam testified with calm precision, walking the court through Aaron's declining vitals. The surgery they were forced to perform without consent, and the risk he'd faced had they waited. The social media posts didn't help my parents' case. The image of Isaac blowing out candles with both of them in the background, glasses raised, time-stamped right in the middle of Aaron's crisis, told a story louder than any words. Even the waitress from the restaurant was called as a witness. She remembered them clearly, remembered the balloons, and how Mom had ordered an expensive bottle of wine to celebrate. They looked happy, she said. Definitely not like they were worried about anything. Their entire defense fell apart when Isaac, under oath, admitted that he knew Aaron was in the hospital that night. When my lawyer asked him if he'd considered suggesting that Mom and Dad stay with Aaron instead of attending his party, he shrugged and said, "It was my birthday." I watched the judge's face closely during that moment. She didn't move, didn't speak, but I saw it, one small muscle twitching in her cheek like she was biting back something sharp. When closing arguments wrapped, I honestly didn't know how things would fall. But I didn't care about the money. I cared about making sure no one ever said I didn't fight for my kid when it mattered most. The judgment came 2 weeks later. The courtroom was packed, and my parents sat 2 rows behind their lawyer, grim and silent. The judge didn't waste words. The court finds that the defendants acted with reckless disregard for the health and safety of a minor in their care. This was not a misunderstanding, nor a lapse in communication. It was a deliberate abandonment of duty during a critical medical emergency. Then she delivered the number, $820,000 in damages. Full coverage of Aaron's medical bills, ongoing care, and emotional trauma. All court costs will be paid by my parents. Their lawyer flinched. My parents didn't even move. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, my dad approached me. He looked like he'd aged 20 years since the start of the trial, and his voice was flat. "You've ruined us. I hope you're satisfied." I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "No, I didn't ruin you. You ruined yourselves the second you walked out on a 6-year-old in an ICU." He opened his mouth again, but I turned and walked away before he could say another word. The judgment hit hard. They had to sell the house I grew up in, cash out their retirement savings, and move into a 1-bedroom apartment across town. Isaac moved in with them after his 3rd failed business venture and his girlfriend kicking him out. Last I heard, he was driving for a rideshare company and working on a startup that sold fitness supplements shaped like cartoon characters. None of that mattered to me anymore. The money from the judgment went straight into a trust for Aaron. Colton helped me set it up so that every cent was protected: college, medical care, housing if needed. I didn't touch a dime. It wasn't about profit. It was about putting a price on betrayal and making sure they understood there were consequences. Gwen moved into a little house 10 minutes from us not long after the trial. She came over 3 times a week, helped with school pickups, and still brought Aaron hot meals every Monday, even when he begged for pizza instead. Two of my employees, Reggie and Miles, started stopping by on weekends to help with yard work or bring their kids over to play. Reggie taught Aaron how to fish. Miles helped him build a model rocket for the science fair. Those two men became more family to my son than his own blood ever had. The contract with Cheng's team exploded into a full-scale partnership. What started as a single renovation turned into a long-term expansion plan. We grew from 10 employees to over 40. We opened offices in 3 other states. Cheng visited the office twice a year and always asked about Aaron. He even brought a toy robot from Hong Kong the last time he visited, said it was for the bravest boy in the Midwest. Years passed. Aaron grew taller, stronger, smarter. He made the honor roll. He played soccer with a vengeance. He started coding projects and told me he wanted to build apps one day. He never once asked about my parents, not even in passing, until the day he came home with a family tree project. "Do I have another grandma?" he asked casually. I told him the truth, that I had parents, but we didn't speak anymore. "Were they mean?" he asked. "Not exactly," I said. "They just didn't show up when it mattered." He nodded slowly, kind of like how Miles always helps me with stuff, even though he's not really family. I smiled at him. Exactly like that. It was a Sunday evening when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I was helping Aaron with his math homework, something about decimals and fractions, when the screen lit up. A woman's voice, calm but professional, said she was calling from Willow Heights Medical Center. "Your mother's been admitted with a major cardiac event," she said. "She's stable, but asking for you." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a moment staring at the page of numbers Aaron had been working on. I didn't rush out the door. I finished helping him with the rest of the worksheet, reheated some leftover pasta, and tucked him into bed like it was any other night. Only after he was asleep did I drive across the city, pulling into the same hospital garage I'd pulled into 5 years earlier with Aaron in the back seat, seizing and silent. It felt like a memory was crawling out of the shadows to sit beside me in the car. When I walked into the room, she looked small and fragile, buried in wires and IVs, an oxygen tube taped beneath her nose. My father sat beside the bed, his hair thinner and his hands shaking slightly. He looked up, and when he saw me, something like hope flashed in his eyes. "Wes, thank God." We didn't know who else to call. I didn't answer. I looked at my mother, who tried to lift her hand toward me, the gesture weak but unmistakable. "Please," she said. "I need surgery. We don't have the coverage. Can you help us?" I didn't react. I didn't get angry. I just stood there with the image of Aaron's bandaged head flashing across my memory. "You left him when he was dying," I said, my voice low and even, "to go eat dinner with Isaac." My father's voice cracked with urgency. "This is different. It was one mistake. She needs a bypass. The insurance doesn't cover all of it. Please, Wes. We'll pay you back." I met his eyes and saw the desperation they once refused to show when I begged for help as a kid. "You mean like you paid back the court judgment?" I asked. She whispered again. "I was wrong. I know that now. Please don't let me die." I took a deep breath, stepped closer to her bed, and said, "You'll be fine. This is a hospital." Her face twitched. I knew she recognized her own words, the same one she used when she justified leaving Aaron alone that night. "Aaron told me something," I added when I asked him what I should do. He said, "Help Grandma a little, not because she deserves it, but because we're not like them." The next day, I had my attorney deliver a check for $10,000, enough for a consultation and a portion of the surgery. Along with it came a letter, short and final. "This concludes our relationship. There will be no future support. This account is closed permanently." I didn't attend the surgery. I didn't visit after. The only update I received came from a former client of mine, a cardiologist who performed the surgery at a reduced rate and called out of professional courtesy. "She'll make it," he said. "You did the right thing, whatever that means for you." A few months later, Isaac showed up at my office. He looked like someone who had burned through every bridge and finally noticed the fire. He asked for money. Said it was for a business pitch involving eco-friendly gym equipment. I asked him to leave. When he wouldn't, security walked him out before he finished his sales pitch. Aaron asked me again about my parents a few weeks after that, this time not out of schoolwork, but genuine curiosity. Are they still alive? He asked. I nodded. But they're not part of our lives. Not everyone earns a second chance just because they share our name. He seemed to understand. That's okay, he said. We got a good family already. And he's right. Because family, the real kind, isn't born, it's built. It's Reggie showing up to coach soccer when I couldn't. It's Miles teaching Aaron how to weld his first science fair project. It's Gwen standing in the ICU doorway before dawn, whispering prayers she'd never admit to saying. It's all the people who stayed when they had every reason to walk away. So no, I didn't go to her funeral when she passed 6 months later. I sent flowers and a card that read, I'm sorry for your loss. Because once a long time ago, I called her mom. But that person's been gone a long time, and I've made peace with that. I don't regret the lawsuit. I don't regret cutting ties. I only regret trusting people who showed me who they were too many times before I believed them. Aaron's safe. I'm at peace. That's enough for me.